The Four Tops are an American vocal quartet from Detroit who helped define the city's Motown sound of the 1960s. And they have been active since 1953 to the present day. That's a
Yes,
long time, Nick.
that is correct.
That's a long time. So the three albums that we covered from the Four Tops are, and can we please all take a moment to thank the Four Tops for releasing an eponymous debut, The Four Tops, in 1965, because we were worried.
Yeah, that really helped.
Yeah, we
It
started
really did.
season one off correct now with an eponymous debut. Yeah, the podcast just needs to be me discovering things. I'm down. I like to discover things.
It's fun.
So yeah, we did the Four Tops from 1965. We
Right.
followed it up with Reach Out from 1967. And then we wrapped things up with 1988's Indestructible.
Indestructible.
And Nick,
Okay,
go. It's your
it's
turn.
my turn. So let's just get this out of the way because we're going to be saying it a lot. The Four Tops they just don't write their songs. There's
Yeah,
just not a
for
writing
sure.
thing. We're all just gonna have to deal with that when we get to it. They're on the Motown label. Obviously, they're one of the key groups from Motown. A lot of the songs on this are Holland Dozier Holland songs, which is usually a good thing. And it is a good thing here. I mean, it's a really good record. I enjoyed it. I could definitely tell that the label knew that this was probably one of the groups to put a lot of their oomph behind, like the Supremes, like the Temptations, like Smokey and the Miracles. Like they knew that they had something in the Four Tops, so they clearly invested a lot of effort into this record. You get tons of musicians appearing. You get some string stuff. You get some horn stuff as well as the regular band. Um, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that the lead singer Stubbs is strong. I think he's a little different because he's baritone, and most of
Yeah,
the time the lead singers in these groups are tenors or tenor twos, um, and that just made them more unique to me. And you can't go wrong here with this record if you like Motown sound. The Four Tops debut is definitely a record you're going to enjoy from beginning to end.
100%. So I have a couple things about the Four Tops before we get into the Four Tops album that I just found really interesting.
Of course.
And we'll definitely talk about this as we'll talk about one of them as an X Factor, so I'm going to skip over it for now. But I do really, really love Stubbs singing. I know you mentioned it,
Mhm.
but it is what really separates them for me from groups like the Temptations and things like that, where it's like hearing that baritone vocal come in and carry the tune instead of just coming in for a song or two or coming in for a breakup or a bridge almost, or like
Mhm.
hearing that be the leading concise factor, but still knowing that the rest of the the rest of the group has those powerhouse vocals and harmonies and stuff. It creates a different dynamic. Now, I was a little interested to find out what was considered their biggest song, and I'm gonna hold off on that and talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
But I just want to leave a little bit of breadcrumbs there.
Alrighty.
Breadcrumbs for us to talk about.
I'm intrigued.
Now, the actual album. It's so Holland Dozier Holland that it's immediately recognizable. The subject matter, the sounds. Um, I was a little surprised at the sheer number of Four Top songs I knew.
Okay.
That was interesting. Now, I believe, Nick, if I'm not mistaken, have we not performed a Four Top song?
We did one time at a
I
wedding
Believe in You and Me.
4 years ago.
Isn't I Believe in You and Me Four Tops?
Oh yeah.
We've done that a couple times. So
yeah,
that
I
was
totally
fun.
forgot about that.
I know. But again, harmonies, absolutely solid, super tight. Vocal power, extremely tight. This is a band like a lot of these quartets early on that suffer from the recording quality. It's much harder to do in the time. There was definitely a little bit of peak and a little bit of bleed that I didn't love to listen to. Not the fault of the Four Tops in any way. You can definitely hear that they're tight and they're concise and they're just blowing out the tiny diaphragm on whatever mic they're using at
Sure.
the time. But again, we won't talk at all about them not writing their own songs until we get to it later. So that is, I'm not even going to mention it. The songs are strong. I feel like maybe the placement on the album had me questioning. Like, for instance, opening side one with Baby I Need Your Lovin'. Great song. The second song being Without the One You Love. Very similar song. Maybe don't put it second. Maybe make
Yeah, I
that
get
like
that.
the fourth or fifth song, or maybe even side one or B side track one. Like, just there was a couple moments in there that I was questioning that. Although overall, overwhelmingly loved and approved of this album. Now we get to Reach Out. And Reach Out has what people consider the Four Tops' biggest song to be, which is Reach Out, I'll Be There.
Sure, yeah.
Now, if you asked me, what's the Four Tops' biggest song? I would say Sugar Pie Honey
Sugar Pie
Bunch.
Honey Bunch?
I like immediately. And so I was a little confused. I was a little surprised
Oh, did you
that
not
people
know it by
thought,
the title?
oh, I did. I knew it by the title.
Okay, I was gonna say, like, was it one of those things where you heard it and you're like, oh no, of course it's this one.
No, I knew it by the title, but I was a little surprised to be like, it's definitely a huge song. It's,
Oh yeah.
I thought that would be more of a debate. I would definitely think that'd be more of a, oh no, it's this or that. Like, it's in debate which one's the bigger song for them. But the fact that the consensus is that it's Reach Out, I'll Be There instead of Sugar Pie Honey Bunch, because I definitely hear Sugar Pie Honey Bunch more. I was just a little
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I'm gonna stay agnostic on that one.
sure. Now, this is an album of covers and songs written for them. So that is an interesting thing. The songs that are for them, Reach Out, I'll Be There, Another Holland, Dozier Holland, at this point, they are giving them some of their stronger songs.
Definitely.
They're backing the Four Tops by saying, like, these are winners we think, sing them. And they are, and they're doing well. But then they're covering songs like Walk Away Renee. They're covering If I Were a Carpenter, a really good cover of Last Train to Clarksville. One of two Monkey songs they covered. So they did Last Train to Clarksville, and then they did I'm a Believer, which were both really interesting to listen to.
They were.
My favorite cover that they did on this album, because it's probably my favorite group that nobody ever talks about, was Cherish by The Association.
Yeah.
Because I freaking love The Association. And also I think that more than any of the other songs really gave the vocal harmonics of the Four Tops a chance to shine, because that's all The Association is about, is harmonies and layering and stuff. So got to really listen to a good version of that. But all in all, another really strong, really well-produced album. This album, even more than the first album, though, I heard a lot of peaking, a lot of like mic issues, which were a little upsetting to hear.
Sure. So I mostly just agree with everything that you had to say there. It was another very enjoyable album to listen to from beginning to end. Reach Out, I'll Be There is a timeless classic. Absolutely love it.
Yes.
I was like, I definitely wrote the word interesting for the Monkees covers. I still haven't decided how I feel about them. I know that I don't enjoy them as much as the Monkees versions of Last Train to Clarksville and I'm a Believer. But they definitely took those songs in a different direction. They weren't just like parroting what was already the popular version of the tune. So I definitely respect that decision.
Yeah.
And I'd be remiss not to mention that this album is number 429 in the top 500 albums of all time on Rolling Stone's list.
Yes, and I will tell you right now, to me, that's incredible for
Yeah,
an album that's this heavily made up of covers to be on
you're
that
right.
list. That's such a when you think about it in that context, that's like extremely impressive to me.
You're right. Okay, so we're moving on to Indestructible. It's a new
Which
decade.
here's what I need to say
Go ahead.
before you get into anything.
Of
This
course.
album was released in the 80s. This
Yes.
album was released in the 1980s.
1988. So
Still the
on a
80s.
different record label. So yeah, we've jumped for about 21 years, and they've been through a few record labels, and they went back to Motown, and then they left Motown to do this record, and then they went back to Motown again for one more after this, but we didn't cover it because it's a Christmas record. But anyway, this is objectively not terrible to listen to. But Pat, it was so cheesy that I was literally nauseous. Like, this is the cheesiest album I've ever heard. Like I said, it's not necessarily bad to listen to. The vocals are still strong, but like I wanted to vomit from how much cheese was on this record. Like, and I love cheese. Cheese is one of my favorite foods of all time, but I'm like lactose intolerant now because
Uh-huh.
like I didn't hate any of these songs individually, but this whole album gave me indigestion. It was just like the corniest, cheesiest. Ugh, like come on, man. Like it. You know how when we were criticizing Frankie Valli for by the end of his career, especially when you could tell he was just hit chasing, and
Yeah.
everything just sounded so contrived. That was sort of how I felt about this record. I mean, I can't say anything was objectively bad about what they were doing, but I could never listen to it again. Ever.
Okay.
I did not enjoy my time here.
Well, before I vehemently disagree with you,
Sure.
I want to say what I just did. So you
On
were
par with Rick Astley. Thank you.
you
for
were
asking.
oh, come on. Come on. It is
Maybe not the
no.
worst of Rick Astley on par.
It's
but
not
on par with
cheesier
the
than Rick
average of-
Astley. I promise you. We'll
Okay.
discuss. We will discuss. Also, hello, Kelsey. Okay. Before we get into the album, because now I need to defend it.
yeah.
I had a mental epiphany as you were talking. And because I had mentioned multiple times that I had issues with the quality, the sound quality.
Yes.
And I went, other artists that I've had trouble with the sound quality for were victims of the 2008 Universal fire. And so were the Four Tops, because I went and looked it up.
Who'd have thunk?
So it's not the masters. That's what the problem is.
Yeah.
It's recorded versions of it, but it's not the masters.
Yeah.
And now it makes a lot more sense because I was like,
What a tragedy
I feel
that
like
was.
for a group that was this popular and this famous and this backed by Motown, why are we getting such crappy audio?
Right.
And that makes sense. Now I know. Okay. So, thank you, Kitty. This was a last minute addition. Was putting the lower third in, so I'm glad that it is helpful. I understand where you're coming from. However, this album transitions itself from a vocal group doing Motown to like a vocal group doing like pop R&B almost. It's just not the same genre. It's definitely got a lot of that 80s flair. However, I don't think the subject matter is any cheesier than it was in the 60s. I think they're singing about the same things. They're singing about love. They're singing about girls. They're singing about all that stuff. But because the coat of paint is different, you're singing in a completely different light. I think the lyrical subject matter is exactly the same, which is why I'm not
That was
complaining
not
about
what
it.
I loved about. That's not what anyone really loves about like these '60s pop groups, is it?
But then if you
You
go
know,
back, and hold it under that, with that scaling system there, vocally, I would say they're just as strong, maybe even stronger at times, because they have more, almost more like soul ballad in them at times, where each of them are getting a little bit of a moment to like kind of wail on the song a little bit more. And that is just, I thought that for the same reason I liked the older stuff, I'm liking the newer stuff. I think they're showcasing their voices in similar ways, and I don't think it's as cheesy and indigestion causing because subjectively, it's the exact same thing. And if anybody listening to this, is somebody who enjoys music from the '80s, unlike Mr. Nicholas, because
right?
that's the only difference between these four top records is that one
Oh,
has '80s music.
I don't disagree. I just found the music like indigestion causing.
I'm
it
just
was
saying
just
it's the
too
only
cheesy.
thing that's different. It's the only thing that's different. So
For
that's why
sure.
I liked it just as much as the first two. I thought that what it showed was a group not clinging to the past. And unlike Frankie Valli, I did not get a hit chasing vibe off of them. I didn't get the hit chasing vibe because this never struck me as a group who's like fundamentally altering everything about themselves, more so than a group that just is been together for so long that they want to mix things up and they're trying to grow with the times. It just felt different. It felt like a more authentic change to me. And that's what I'll say.
Fair.
And yes, Kitty, I knew you'd be on my side. Thank you.
Well, you all enjoy the cheese. I just
Either
couldn't handle
way,
it. I couldn't handle it.
let's
Let's grade
let's
them.
grade them.
I think they get a good score for cultural impact.
Well, let's get some thresholds here.
Yes, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, class of 1990. Vocal Group Hall of Fame, class of 1999. Obviously, they were a premier group for Motown. I would say they're not on par with groups like the Temptations, Supremes, and Miracles in terms of their overall importance and well-knownness. However, they're not that far behind. They're kind of right after those groups in terms of the Motown sound.
Yeah, and also they're ranked number 79 on Rolling Stone's list of
Yeah.
100 great artists of all
hmm
time in 2004. Now, I definitely think these are all contributing to a high score. I think
Yes.
there's songs that people know by the Four Tops. I think that they are a recognizable name, a
Yep.
storied name, and I think that they are the second highest score of the week. And I would be putting them in like the sevens range.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah, probably closer to like a 7.5, maybe even a 7.5.
And I will write that in and then we can move on. Uh, so, in terms of their breadth of work, they've sold about 50 million records, and their discography is about 26 studio albums because I am not
Sure.
including the Christmas record, and I think that
We
was the only
never
one I
include
needed to
Christmas
cut out.
records.
So, that's good. That is
And
two
it's
pillars,
good, and
and
I
I
would
think
give
they
them a
get.
quality bump.
And I will just temper it slightly because I'm giving them mostly a quality bump, just not as much as you would.
Only because you don't like the '80s.
Look, if one of your albums makes me nauseous, it hurts a little, just a little. It still evens out to be more of a bump than not.
Whatever, man. You're just a hater of the '80s.
You're right.
You
You know what?
Hades the
Zero.
'80s.
Zero. Any group that put out a single song in that decade is now just getting zeros across the board. Even though
Hold on.
oh,
That changes a lot of things
that
for you,
changes
my friend.
every score,
That changes
including
your list of favorite artists drastically.
yeah, I know. Also, don't you remember? I don't know. Was it the beginning of this episode when I was talking to you about one of my favorite albums of that decade and how I loved "Strong Persuader" by Robert Cray long before we did this
Which
podcast,
I
even
don't
though it
get
was
because
written in 1986?
yeah, but that's just because there's no '80s in it. It's just blues.
Okay,
You just like things that are released in the 80s that don't sound like the 80s.
Sure.
You know, you look,
Who doesn't?
you listen to enough music, you know there's a lot of music that's recognizable by decade. There just
Sure.
is.
Oh yeah.
You put on a Nirvana album, I know what decade that came out in. You put on Sublime, same thing. You put on like Village People, I know what decade it came out in. You know,
Yeah.
you put on like Kelly Clarkson and like that early, or Avril Lavigne, that early 2000s pop, I know what decade it came out in.
Of course.
It's just recognizable stuff. But, you know, you can't just hate it. You can't just hate it. I disagree.
Okay.
You're not allowed.
I love it now.
Good.
Anyway.
There it is.
Answering the question of breadth of work score, I think it's good. I think it's maybe in the high 6s.
Yeah, I was thinking
And
like a
that's where I'm
6.9.
Done. And then instrumental talent, I mean, again, we're talking about a vocal group, so we're weighing that a little bit more heavily than what's underneath them. What's underneath them is pretty standard.
Standard backing tracks,
but not bad.
4 strong vocalists who all take time to shine. It doesn't feel like there's a weak link that they're covering for.
I agree.
I'm feeling really good about giving them a higher score for a vocal group here, like in the 6s.
Sure, I have no issues with that whatsoever.
So let's give them like a 6.3.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to give them a 0.1 for
0.1 and a 0.1?
0.1 for poetic.
Yes. Now, X Factor.
Yes.
There's a couple things that I want to give, or at least want to talk about. They are one, still performing. So Duke Fakir is the only surviving member and is still performing with like members.
Wow.
At like 87 years old or 86.
Incredible.
He is, and I'm sorry, yeah, he's 86 and still going strong. He'll be 87 this year.
Love it.
But they were founded as the Four Aims. And the 4 members, Levi Stubbs, Duke Fakir, Obi Benson, and Lawrence Payton, remained together and toured from 1953 until 1997.
When Payton passed away.
Correct. Now, we have done multiple vocal groups from this time period. We've done multiple groups from this time period. That is literally unheard of.
It's pretty incredible.
A lot of these vocal groups of the time were revolving doors. They were just fit in vocal parts as they went. There was never a like definitive group. It was the name. Like the Temptations were the Temptations, but like the people in the Temptations were not recognized because it was just about the music. Like this is a group who had kind of the best of both worlds. They didn't have like a Frankie Valli of the Four Seasons vibe where everybody knew Frankie Valli, but people kind of didn't care about the Four Seasons, even though they should have, as we talked about on their episode. This is a group of like 4 people who all got famous together making music, stayed together making music until one of them passed away. And then they started kind of replacing as they died until there's just one left.
Right.
Just an incredible story.
Yeah, no, I mean,
deserving of an X Factor for me, I think. Like, that's such a rare feat in music.
What would you like?
At least half a point.
Fascinating. I'll give you 0.4.
Because it's unheard of. We've never had another group do that another vocal group.
The Isley Brothers do that?
I mean,
not that the Isley Brothers are exclusively a vocal group either. But there were other people.
They're also literally related brothers.
Sure.
Much harder to break up when you're brothers.
Yeah.
And also they weren't together for quite as long because they died earlier.
Right.
And that's their fault.
That is their fault. I'm very upset with them.
Go on, half a point. Do it.
All right, fine. You can have
a point.
Take your stinking half a point.